Every so often, a machine arrives that changes what people expect from four wheels and an engine. Not because it's the fastest or flashiest, but because it simply refuses to quit. Picture a car that shrugs off brutal miles, that works through desert heat, crowded city traffic, or icy mountain passes without complaint. Imagine a vehicle so trusted it becomes a working partner for entire generations, an unspoken contract between driver and machine. Take care of me, and I'll take care of you. For taxi fleets, small business owners, and families alike, that kind of reliability wasn't just convenient, it was survival. Behind the wheel, the story wasn't about luxury or prestige, but about endurance, pragmatism, and the quiet pride of owning something built to last longer than most people thought possible. This is the story of a car that blurred the line between tool and legend, and whose reputation for immortality still echoes today. Like and subscribe if you enjoy deep dives into automotive icons, and comment below which car or era you want us to cover next. The Mercedes W123 diesel debuted in 1976, and within just a few years it would set a new global standard for durability and trustworthiness in the automotive world. To understand why this series became such a phenomenon, you have to step back to the era in which it was born. The mid-1970s were a turbulent time for car buyers around the world. Oil crises had shaken confidence in gas-guzzling vehicles. Emissions regulations were tightening, and consumers wanted cars that were dependable and economical without giving up comfort. Into that environment, Mercedes positioned the W123 diesel as more than just a car. It was a statement of resilience and practicality. The design brief wasn't about speed or flash. It was about building something so robust that owners would never have to question whether their car could handle the miles ahead. The engineers leaned heavily on proven formulas. Diesel power plants known for their fuel efficiency and longevity, bodies designed with conservative but unmistakably premium styling, and interiors that focused on usability rather than gimmicks. When people first saw the Mercedes W123 diesel, they may not have thought it radical, but behind that modest shape was a car designed to outlive trends, rivals, and sometimes even its owners. The initial reception was steady rather than explosive. Buyers respected the promise of longevity, even if they didn't yet realize how legendary it would become. Mercedes understood that the world didn't just want cars with flair. It wanted cars that could become reliable partners, vehicles that could carry families through decades or run taxi services for hundreds of thousands of miles. That guiding philosophy defined the W123 diesel from the ground up, and it explains why this model remains etched into automotive memory. In production, each example was assembled with the kind of attention to detail that has since become almost mythical. Panels were thick, the paint deep, the engines overbuilt to handle far more stress than the average driver would ever throw at them. The suspension components were equally stout, designed for rough roads and high loads rather than fragile comfort tuning. It wasn't the kind of car that invited you to speed. It invited you to relax into the knowledge that this machine would still be running tomorrow, next year, and maybe even next generation. Ownership of a Mercedes W123 diesel in those years meant stepping into a different mindset. Drivers knew they were buying a slower car by modern standards. The diesel engines didn't rush. They strolled, but they also knew the trade-off was worth it when fuel economy and bulletproof longevity kept costs lower than flashier alternatives. Owners in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East quickly began to notice that while rivals succumbed to rust, broken suspensions, or failed engines, their W123 diesels just kept going. Stories began to circulate about cars passing the 300,000-mile mark with little more than routine maintenance. About taxis that ran from sunrise to well past midnight day after day, never skipping a beat. The W123 diesel became not just a product, but a cultural marker. One of those rare cars that seem to exist in every corner of the world, trusted by people from every walk of life. In the US, it carried a slightly different weight. Imported versions emphasized the prestige of owning a Mercedes, while offering Americans a taste of diesel efficiency that was rare in the domestic market. At a time when gas prices were a constant worry, the ability to cruise long distances on less fuel appealed to a particular set of pragmatic buyers. They weren't chasing horsepower bragging rights. They were choosing peace of mind. And for many, that peace of mind turned into loyalty that stretched across decades, as entire families became repeat buyers, handing down W123 diesels like heirlooms. The story of the Mercedes W123 diesel's origin is not about a single engineering breakthrough or a marketing coup. It's about an entire philosophy of design and execution that prioritized durability above all else. It was about meeting a moment in history when the world needed reassurance more than spectacle. This car didn't dazzle with gadgets or overwhelm with speed. It quietly promised that it would be there, mile after mile, long after other cars had been scrapped. That promise was enough to draw in owners from Cairo to California, from Berlin to Boston, and it laid the foundation for what would become one of the most enduring reputations in automotive history. But while its roots and intent explain the how of its creation, the real magic of the Mercedes W123 diesel emerged once it hit the road and proved itself in the most demanding environments imaginable. That is where its legend truly took hold, and that's where our story turns next. The Mercedes W123 diesel proved itself not just in brochures or engineering diagrams, but in the daily grind of real life, where reputation is built 1 mile at a time. Almost immediately after its release, this car found its way into taxi fleets from Europe to Africa, and the reason was simple. It worked harder and lasted longer than almost anything else on the road. In cities like Athens, Cairo, and Istanbul, a Mercedes W123 diesel wasn't just another cab. It was the default choice for drivers who needed to keep their livelihoods rolling. For passengers, climbing into one became a symbol of trust, an unspoken assurance that this ride would reach its destination without drama. When competitors broke down under the strain of constant stop-and-go traffic, punishing heat, or poorly maintained roads, the W123 diesel kept idling, kept moving, kept earning. This reliability created stories that fueled its legend. Tales of half-million-mile odometers, of engines rebuilt only after decades of work, of bodies that refused to rust away despite salt and dust. And these weren't marketing exaggerations. They were lived experiences for taxi drivers, families, and travelers who counted on the car day in and day out. In the US, where the car carried more prestige, its reputation grew differently. Owners valued the Mercedes W123 diesel not for sheer performance, but for the quiet knowledge that it represented security. It became the go-to choice for people who wanted to hedge against fuel shortages or unpredictable costs. And while some mocked the slow acceleration, those behind the wheel knew they had something that could keep going when rivals faltered. A rival might have offered more horsepower or flashier styling, but few cars inspired such loyalty simply by surviving everything thrown at them. By the early 1980s, the W123 diesel was not just a car, but an ecosystem. Mechanics appreciated its simplicity and durability. Parts suppliers thrived on its global demand, and the used market saw prices stay unusually strong for a model that should have depreciated much faster. For some, the car became a platform for personal identity, tuned, modified, or customized, yet always respected for its indestructible base. Enthusiasts learned how to coax even more miles from the engines, while taxi companies wrote contracts assuming decades of service life. All of this reinforced the perception that this was no ordinary vehicle, but a workhorse that bordered on myth. Even regulation played its part. As emissions laws tightened and governments sought cleaner fleets, the Mercedes W123 diesel often sat in the middle of debates. Some argued that its long life offset its emissions by reducing waste, while others criticized diesels more broadly for their smoke and smell. Yet the car endured, in part because it represented a kind of balance. Economical fuel use, mechanical honesty, and a global reach that few could challenge. The resilience of the Mercedes W123 diesel was also reflected in its cultural presence. Films, photographs, and personal stories captured it as a background character, often unremarkable but always dependable. In places where other vehicles might have symbolized wealth or rebellion, the W123 diesel symbolized something more practical: survival, trust, continuity. It was never about glamour. It was about showing up, doing the job, and then doing it again tomorrow. What made this even more compelling was the way the car connected people across continents. A farmer in rural France and a taxi driver in Lagos could share the same admiration for the same machine, even though their lives were worlds apart. The Mercedes W123 diesel became a universal shorthand for dependability, and this universality is what elevated it beyond a mere product. By the end of its production run in the mid-1980s, the W123 diesel had cemented itself as the embodiment of reliability, an icon in markets as diverse as Europe, North America, and Africa. It wasn't flashy, but it didn't need to be. It had written its reputation in the mileage logs and balance sheets of thousands of owners. What began as a cautiously conservative sedan evolved into a global workhorse that many would later call immortal. But the story doesn't end there. because once production stopped, the true test began. Would the Mercedes W123 diesel remain relevant, or would it fade away like so many other once great machines? That's the question that shapes the final part of its legacy. The Mercedes W123 diesel faced its greatest test after production ended in 1985. Could it remain relevant in a world moving quickly toward modern electronics, stricter emissions rules, and changing consumer tastes? Remarkably, the answer was yes, because the qualities that define the car, longevity, simplicity, and trust, only grew more valuable as other vehicles aged out or became expensive to maintain. The Mercedes W123 diesel wasn't just another used car. It became a lifeline for people who needed affordable, reliable transportation in every corner of the globe. In Africa, it continued as the backbone of taxi fleets well into the 1990s and beyond, running through heat, dust, and minimal maintenance. In Eastern Europe and the Middle East, it became a symbol of endurance during periods of economic uncertainty, where keeping a car running wasn't a hobby, but a necessity. And in the United States, surviving examples gained a cult following, as enthusiasts began to recognize the historical weight of owning a car that had proven nearly unkillable. This legacy didn't just rest on mileage alone. It lived in the way people trusted the car enough to push it into extreme scenarios. Long-haul road trips across continents, humanitarian work in remote regions, or family duty across generations. The Mercedes W123 diesel became more than transport. It was a partner in resilience, a machine that turned reliability into a kind of cultural currency. The fact that so many are still on the road today, 4 decades after their debut, speaks volumes about the original engineering philosophy. Even in markets flooded with SUVs and modern luxury sedans, the sight of a W123 diesel rolling down the road carries a quiet authority. It tells you this is a car that outlasted not only rivals, but trends themselves. In retrospect, the Mercedes W123 diesel reshaped what buyers expected from durability. It set the blueprint for long-lived cars, proving that with the right design, a vehicle could serve multiple generations and still hold value far beyond its initial purchase. This lasting impact continues to influence how enthusiasts, collectors, and everyday drivers view automotive history. More than nostalgia, it is a recognition that durability has its own kind of beauty, and that sometimes the slow, steady machine leaves the most enduring mark. The Mercedes W123 diesel may have begun as a pragmatic choice, but today it stands as a cultural artifact, a lesson in how trust and endurance can make a car legendary. Its story is not just about the past. It is about what reliability means in an age where so much feels disposable, and that is the true measure of its immortality. The Mercedes W123 diesel, introduced in 1976 and produced until 1985, remains one of the most important case studies in what happens when durability is treated as a design goal rather than an afterthought. For US viewers, the lessons are especially striking. On American roads, the W123 diesel didn't arrive with fanfare about speed or luxury. It arrived as a dependable alternative during fuel crises, a car that prioritized economy and longevity at a time when uncertainty ruled. 4 decades later, surviving examples still roam highways and neighborhoods, and that persistence alone says more than any advertisement could. If you're considering ownership today, the Mercedes W123 diesel represents both opportunity and responsibility. On one hand, you're buying into a vehicle that was overbuilt from the start, with mechanical simplicity that allows careful owners to keep them running indefinitely. On the other hand, age introduces challenges: rust in the bodywork, wear in suspension components, and the need for proper maintenance on engines that, while robust, are no longer new. Parts availability remains solid thanks to the car's global footprint, but finding examples that haven't been neglected is increasingly difficult. Pricing reflects this split. Well-maintained W123 diesels command surprising sums on the collector and enthusiast market, while tired versions tempt buyers with low prices but often demand more investment than expected. For those who secure a good one, ownership means stepping into a slower, more deliberate pace of driving. Diesel engines aren't about quick acceleration, but about the satisfaction of steady, unflappable progress. Reliability today remains real, but it requires respecting the car's age, scheduled maintenance, careful storage, and the willingness to treat it as a classic rather than a disposable commuter. And that's perhaps the most valuable lesson for US enthusiasts. The Mercedes W123 diesel isn't just a nostalgic taxi from overseas. It's proof that a car can transcend eras, That durability itself can create a legacy stronger than style or horsepower. It set a precedent that still influences how people judge lasting quality, and it shows why certain machines earn reputations that echo for generations. In a world where many cars are forgotten once their warranties expire, the W123 diesel stands as a reminder that trust, not flash, is the foundation of true automotive immortality. The final word is simple. The Mercedes W123 diesel isn't just a car you drive, it's a car you live with, and one that proves endurance can be legendary.